Hey, it's Adam here. I am sitting in the office of Scott St. Jean, and we've got Mark Swenson here as well. Why don't you guys, Mark, go ahead and introduce yourself and tell us what you do.
Okay. I'm Mark Swenson. I'm the lead program manager for Microsoft's intranet search tool. So we run the search on MSW, we have expertise location, and we're doing some taxonomy and metrics.
Okay. How long have you been at Microsoft, Mark?
I've been at Microsoft about 2.5 years.
Okay.
Just kind of made the rounds, Fortune 500 companies within the Puget Sound area, but I've worked in search for about 15, 16 years.
Wow, okay. And Scott?
Hi, I'm Scott St. Jean. I'm program manager for IT. Responsibilities primarily have been driving the dog food for Office Server of the last release, as well as a lot of our service growth and some of the projects that we're doing in terms of expansion.
Okay.
What we're doing.
All right. How long have you been in MSIT?
I joined MSIT about 3 years ago after a stint over in Microsoft's consulting services.
Okay.
So I've been with the company probably about 5.5 years.
Great.
And doing this kind of stuff now for about 8-9 years.
Okay. So all your MCS stuff was all portal work as well?
Content management server as well as SharePoint.
Okay, cool. Well, that's why I wanted to talk to you guys today, was to talk about SharePoint, and specifically I wanted to get the story. You are the guys that are working with Microsoft's internal SharePoint deployment all the time, and I wanted to kind of find out what that's like. Can you give us a little bit of an idea of the scope of our SharePoint installation today?
Sure. So right now, as far as we know, we're still running the largest deployment for SharePoint, whether 2003 or 2007. The way that we're deployed is we have services in 3 regions. We're in Dublin for EMEA, Middle East, Africa. We're in Singapore for our Asia and South Pacific. And then finally, we're here in Redmond, or the Seattle area, for North and South America. The way that we've deployed it is basically we provide regional services in each Dublin and Asia. And then from Redmond, when we do things like search, we actually do that at an enterprise level or worldwide, where we crawl content in all regions so that we can provide search results from one area.
Okay.
Overall, we've probably got about 130 to 140,000 site collections. Represents about 12 terabytes worth of content. We've got various flavors of Windows SharePoint services in place, since we're not done our upgrades yet.
Okay.
So some are 2.0, some are 3.0. We have SharePoint portal services still in place from 2003 that are being upgraded, and then Microsoft Office, excuse me, SharePoint Server, we've got deployed to all 3 of our regions. Overall, I think we're probably running 25, 30 million documents, maybe.
Yeah, we're at 23. We're at about 23 million now. We're going to be crawling some stuff in the regions. We figure we'll pick up another 2 million. We figure we're doubling about every 6 to 9 months right now.
Yeah.
Wow. So give us an idea. What's the scope of search? You mentioned a big site number. How many sites are we?
We're not really sure totally number of sites, just because new sites come up all the time. There are sites on our desks that we may not know about. We're crawling a lot of SharePoint sites. We're crawling non-SharePoint sites. We're crawling file shares, public folders, pretty much anything that's out there that we know of we're trying to crawl. And then we have security and ACLs that lock that down, so if you have access to that information, you can see it. If you don't have access to that information, it won't show up in the search results. And that's one of our big education areas that we're trying to train people on, is because they'll see information that's out there and go, oh man, if I can see it, everybody can see it. And what we're trying to say is, no, if you have permissions, you can see it. If you don't have permissions, you cannot see it.
Okay, that's always one of the search horror stories you hear in companies, is somebody does a search and finds the layoff list or something.
Yeah, and I've been in companies that crawlers are very good at doing that kind of stuff, and they will find that kind of information. But with information that we have locked down within the company, following the rules and the ACLs and stuff like that, we don't have a huge problem with it, or it's not something we've seen. Although the great thing about this next version of SharePoint is that it allows us that if we do find some documents that are in there that by mistake or whatever are available, we can immediately remove them from the index and get rid of them real quick. Cool.
Do you have a sense for how many searches you're doing a day?
Yeah, we're doing a couple of 100,000 a day. We've probably done 6 to 8 million in the last 6 months. We've got much better metrics now for doing that kind of stuff. We keep track of the most popular searches. We even have them on the homepage of MSW that we update, I believe, once a week. So we know what people are looking for and doing stuff. We've also got a system called Best Bets that are editorially driven. So when people enter in those search terms, we've kind of had people go through and say, we think they're going here, and we'll list a couple of top places that they're going if they enter in specific terms to help people find information quicker.
Okay. What are some of the things that you do to discover sites that are out there? I remember, when I started at Microsoft, before we had a kind of a cohesive search, you had to know what product group sites were out there and go find them on your own.
Yeah.
I remember, and some of them were pretty easy to guess, like the Windows marketing team
Sure.
site. But I remember Exchange Performance was when pigs fly was their URL. How do you guys, if you didn't know that, how would you discover it? How do you guys find stuff like that?
Yeah, in other companies, what I've done is, we're allowed to just tell the crawler to just go crawl that domain, that fully qualified domain name, Microsoft.com. Unfortunately, in Microsoft.com, we don't have a really good way to do that. So what we've had is, as new sites are created, they're written to a file, and we pull that file down and we use that as our what we call our starting points or our starting place. And that's how we use crawlers to go out and find these information. So as people add new sites, provision new sites, they're made available to a list that we just use to do as a starting place to crawl.
Okay, cool. All right, now we'll switch back over here to Scott. You had mentioned that you've been around the Server 2007 deployment since it started within Microsoft.
Correct.
Tell us how that process goes. I mean, does the product team come to you and say, we want you to start going live with our beta version, or how does it work?
It kind of varies. It's interesting. With some product groups, we're really engaged early on. For other product groups, it takes a while, sort of like, hey, we're over here, you can come ask questions. With the server product group, we've been fairly good. We've had a relationship since day one where the reality is we have a core of knowledge over here that the product group needs. Our developers, our PMs, our testers in the product group are not actually in the process of building or maintaining these environments. And these are fairly large environments. So they do need to come over and understand day to day what our problems are. So if we go back to sort of the deployment times, when we were dealing with 2003 and sort of its rollout into our environment, we took a lot of notes about things that were not going well. So, for example, upgrade was not a very pleasant experience for us. We found that some of the work that we were doing with deletes was a big issue for us. So when users were deleting content, because we set up a service level agreement that we'd restore content for users in the event that they had deleted something inadvertently or deliberately and needed it back, we'd have to go back to tape and actually get these restores. And these could take 7 or 8 days. This could cost thousands of dollars in terms of man hours and effort to get one file back.
Sure.
So we took a lot of notes in terms of the information that we wanted to see within the product. We then basically approached the product group. Usually, it's actually a process we're doing right now as we're planning for 14, is we're basically compiling our top pains list. What are the things that we need to see fixed? What are things that would be better? What are things that we can manage within our strategies as we're moving forward? And go talk to the product group about these issues. We also have really a lot of the PMs, especially at this point, coming to us. So I actually have 2 interviews later today with some folks from the Office Server team to talk about administration, Excel services, upgrade, backup, restore. We're constantly sort of engaging right now, because what the product groups will do is they'll develop their specs. So right now we're at the point of ideas, putting sort of these ideas to a one-page spec, getting into sort of an adds cuts based off of how long will this take to do we have enough budgeted resources to do it. So we're basically weighing in. We're one of the partners for the product group to do that. And we engage very early at this point. We'll go through each of the milestones as they're building these alphas. When they get to the point of a beta for rollout, in the case of search, we rolled out at beta 1. In the case of actual deployment and upgrade, we went at beta 2. So we're engaged up until that point to make sure that everything's ready for us to actually put this into production, make sure the company is running on this for at least 6 months, sometimes longer. So in the case of search, it's been over a year. In the case of our deployment for SharePoint to production, it was about 8 months from when we deployed to when we actually finished with the RTM. So we get engaged in that aspect and basically run through, and we set up sign-off criteria with the product group. So we basically say for us to run our business, or for us to ship, we need to be able to run our business on it. Here are the things we're going to agree to either test, sign off on, spend effort on, and we're sort of engaged at the hip, especially the last 8 months of the deployment.
Okay. And so really the last 8 months, were there some things that you found early on that you were able to go back to the product group and say, for an enterprise to use this product, these are some of the things that need to work better or be changed?
Certainly there are. I mean, I've lost track of how many things we got fixed. I think it's it's well in excess of 600 or 700 specific items. Sort of like, okay, this is in some cases it's a bug, in some cases it's just, yeah, you didn't deploy this quite right, or you didn't architect this in this manner. So like recycle bin, for example, every single beta, or say every single major build, we went, revisited, refined it a little bit to make sure it met what we need. They'd go through changes. When we look at backup restore, this was a big issue for us. So a couple changes that we got in there. At one point, they were not going to be backing up the indexes. We explained why we needed the indexes backed up and ran through that. We realized when we were doing restores that when restoring a shared service provider, you had to restore everything before you can bring the shared service provider online. That could take quite a bit of time, which meant for an outage, for disaster recovery, you could be down for 8 hours instead of 2 or 3. So we did changes of that aspect. We spent a lot of time with the MUM team on the MUM package that was put together for SharePoint with feedback on what's there. I mean, there are a lot of things that sort of get into upgrade. I mean, I can't even count, probably 200 or 300 of the things we did were upgrade related, whether it's how we upgraded, how the tool looks for orphans or things that would break. The reality is that we found especially for this release, upgrade was a really good candidate. Search was another one, in that we were sort of blocked by our legal department in just giving our copies of our databases over to the product group. And we didn't really push this issue this time. We're going to do a lot more work next time. So what we found is the sort of perfect lab environment ended up with when we were actually crawling content or we were upgrading content, everything worked perfectly, and then we brought it into the real environment where people just break stuff and leave broken stuff behind, and upgraders would fail, it would abort, it'd be too slow. We just run into all the bugs, which is great and why we're doing the dog food,
right,
but frustrating that we're not getting in the lab. The same would apply for search. We do search in the lab, everything looked good, we come to production and it's running half the speed. And we have to do a lot of investigation on why. So there's a lot of work that sort of came into that to say, okay, we've got to look at how we do dog food differently and say, okay, at these early alpha stages, we're going to give you copies of our corpus. And we're going to make sure that those that there are, key high business impact type documents in there that shouldn't be stored, that need to be secured. We'll go through, classify the content, but we'll give you real sites. We'll give you real information, and that should mean that the product is that much more stable early on.
Cool.
And one of the reasons why we went with search so early is just to get a good test bed. There wasn't a lot, like Scott was saying. They had built a lab environment that was reasonably clean, but it had few servers and probably not a lot of network latency and the whole 9 yards. And what they ended up finding was that while it worked great in the lab, it just didn't work on a real intranet, to be quite honest. And so all your performance issues, crawling anything in EMEA and Asia or Singapore, I mean, all of that stuff. And so one of the reasons why we did go as early as we did is because we just needed to find the bugs quicker. The other issue is that as we make these fixes, if we have to do recrawls, we're talking a week or 2 weeks to get an index back up in size of what we have, or even longer possibly, just because of the latency and the time that it takes to do all that crawling. So it was a great thing. Plus, one of the things that came out of it was that we were able to offer just a search SKU. So now it's a capability that we can now start doing with competitors like the FAST and the Google and all that kind of stuff. It's just we have now just a search story as opposed to having to buy all of SharePoint just to get the search part of it.
You can buy just the search product.
You can buy the search SKU now.
You'd mentioned we do all the searching from here at the corporate data center for the overseas locations. Is there a bandwidth hit from that? What are we seeing as a result of doing it that way?
Yeah, anytime you go anywhere outside of a really fast network locally here, yeah, you're going to have some issues. We've cut it back so it's not crawling really hard. We try to do harder crawls, more in the evenings where it's less of an issue on the network issue from our perspective here and locally and crawling over there. But yeah, anytime you're going that far of a distance, you're waiting for downloads, and the file sizes can, if some of them get really huge, it can take quite a while for them to come down.
Okay. I'll swing back here, Scott, because you had mentioned backup and restore as one of the places you spend a lot of time. Tell me, how do you back up and restore 12 terabytes of SharePoint
12
data?
terabytes. Well, it's an interesting challenge because actually, much as Mark indicated, every 6 months they're doubling in terms of what they're crawling. We're going up about 50-60% in terms of what we're hosting over a year.
Okay.
So we're seeing anywhere from 3 to 4% growth per month. So it's quite aggressive when you think we're at 12 terabytes. When we started dog food, we were at 5. So over the course of dog fooding, we grew 7. We don't know why. necessarily. It's not articulated to one specific reason. Why is there more content here than others, or where does it become popular? Hopefully it's because people are using the product more.
Right.
When we get to the backup restore, we're basically looking at a couple things. One, we build our systems primarily to be redundant. So other than the index server, which we really can't have a second index server, it's sort of an architecture blocker for us, we have spare servers in all cases. So if we physically lose the machine, we can basically rebuild that machine. We don't worry about a system state image. All we will do is basically rebuild it, install SharePoint, add it back to the farm, and SharePoint will automatically basically configure it accordingly. We just turn the right services on and say, here's your role, go ahead. In the case of databases, what we're doing is every 24 hours we're making full backups of our databases. Now this is sort of legacy for us now in 3 years, where we've been doing fulls. The reason we've been doing full backups is 3 years ago, 2 years ago, even a year ago, we were doing primarily backups from disk to tape.
Okay.
So what would happen is we'd back up from SQL to disk. We use a product right now called SQL Lightspeed.
Mm-hmm.
It gives us compression such that our database files about 40% of what they normally are uncompressed. And then we copy those from disk over to some other backup medium, whether it's near disk or tape. Now when we're writing to tape, getting recovery from tape takes a long period of time.
Right.
So this is where I mentioned 7 to 8 days sort of to recover for backups. It's really a big challenge for us, and why recyclement was so important. Bringing that in place means we eliminate a lot of having to go to these other alternative places for our backups. But what we would find is we're doing these full backups. Users have this tendency not to know when they deleted content. So they think the last time they saw it was last Thursday, but they're not absolutely sure. So we'll go get the database, recover it, bring it online, lo and behold, it's not there. Okay, maybe it was Wednesday. Okay, maybe it was Tuesday. Okay. After a while, this gets really difficult, and if you're dealing with incrementals, you have a problem where if you're putting this on tape and anything goes wrong with the tape, you've lost that entire backup window. You only get back to the last full that you did. So we were doing fulls for a good period of time. That means our backups are quite large. Mm-hmm. We set up backup windows, basically, they range anywhere from basically 6 to 12 hours in different regions. Now we've noticed that our backup speeds have have improved significantly now that we've been moving our SQL servers over to SQL 2005 and even more so a 64-bit architecture. SQL Lightspeed is very CPU intensive, so when we're making these back up to disk, we actually notice that it takes about a third of the time now that it used to take to put those backups from the SQL database directly to disk, and we're able to sort of move it onto tape that much faster. Now we do a few things that are interesting in the fact that within our SQL clusters, we will either use the passive node in the SQL cluster or an extra node that's in the clustering to pivot the disk groups that we do our dumps on over to another server. So once the backups are done, we can take the load completely off the SQL server, and we have a server that all it does for the rest of the day is just copy those backups to tape or near disk. Okay. So we sort of run in this process on a regular basis. Now, we've also engineered our environment so that we have different disk groups for our dump drives versus our data drives. So if we were to go in and lose part of a SAN, we're not going to lose the backups and the data at the same time. Okay. So in most cases when we deal with a disaster recovery, we don't need to go to tape to get that data. We have a copy from the last successful backup somewhere. You know, we may have to recover half of our environment, replace the drives, do things like that. So we spend a good amount of time in that types of those type of backups, content related. We do snapshots on the servers. We maintain archives of any of the customizations that go in some of our servers, like in MS Web, where they've built some custom some custom web parts or custom functionality. We'll have backups archived elsewhere that we can restore from. And then finally, we deal with our backup restore on the shared service provider. Now we use the out-of-the-box functionality to basically back up the indexes, but we back up directly the databases using SQL. So while there are some tools in the product for backing up the databases, we don't currently use them. Because of SQL Lightspeed and some of our operational sort of process, we prefer to use the native SQL tools to what the product groups are providing. And most enterprises are going to do the same thing.
Right.
It's just a comfort level and what you have already in place.
Okay, cool. Tell me about the upgrade process. If I've got an installation of SQL 2003 already out there, I want to start taking advantage of stuff that's in 2007. What are the things I need to think about before starting an upgrade?
Okay, we could fill hours on this very easily. So one of the things I should preface is there was a webcast done in November. Sean Livingston, one of our engineers, sort of did an overview on upgrade. and sort of the technical, the speed, the specific choices, what we saw, and some of our best practices. So certainly if you're really interested in this topic, it's about an hour and 10 minutes or so of sort of running through a slide deck, talking to it. By far one of our authorities on the team in terms of what we did for upgrade.
Okay.
Now, when it comes to the planning aspects of it, our experience is going to differ a little bit than most customers. When Mark and I were spending a lot of time planning for this, we had to consider the dog food aspects of it. We had to consider the fact that we were rolling this code out before it was tested, thoroughly tested anyways, before we have a lot of dependent items like language packs. So one of the things that becomes really important is you need to know your environment. So we had to do a big analysis to determine what languages were deployed in our environment, because we were only going to get 3 languages from the product group. And during the dog food, that became English, German, and Japanese. Well, we happen to have 12 languages in our environment. So we decided very quickly, well, since we don't have Chinese, or since we don't have French, or we don't have Greek, or sort of some of these languages, we couldn't upgrade some of the different environments. We couldn't go to Europe and upgrade some of the team sites, or Asia and do some of it. Fortunately for us, Redmond had only those 3 languages. It was sort of luck of the draw. So we were able to sort of drive through our upgrades and determine, okay, now what are we trying to accomplish? In most cases, when we were doing our upgrades, we knew there would be bugs in the product as we went through, and part of our effort was to discover this. So we were going to choose to sort of upgrade at the pace that made sense for us. We chose gradual upgrade for our team sites. Now, HP Team is about 58 databases in size and has about almost 3 terabytes of content in it now. So this was a WSS 2.0 environment.
Okay.
The important thing with it is it's probably the largest team environment that we're aware of that would be upgraded to SharePoint. And naturally, of course, we broke the product immediately when we started upgrades. We actually installed the product, it failed to install. Turns out the product group had hard-coded something like 28 databases in a stored procedure. We had 58. Problem, we got it fixed. So it was a great test bed, if you will,
right.
and became very interesting. Other things we ran into, oh wait, we just broke InfoPath. InfoPath forms, because we were doing gradual, didn't handle the redirect really gracefully. Okay, product group, you need to go look at this and come up with a fix. When we got it in place, it does become important as you realize what method you're going to use. There's basically 3 methods. If you've got a small deployment, you can do an in-place upgrade, which basically means it upgrades the bits and the data at the same time. If you are dealing with only being able to upgrade parts of your site at a period of time, or having to do, because it's so large like we were, you couldn't just do it in a weekend or a day, you're going to look at gradual. But when you use gradual upgrade, especially for team sites, but also for anything else, you end up with 2 URLs. The original sites move over to a new URL. So in our case, we went and called it Team V2, which in of itself was a big mistake because it confused users. They thought we'd already upgraded their sites by putting V2 in, sort of internally thinking too much about the product.
Okay.
So we sort of look at it and go, okay, call it Team Old, call it Team Temp, call it anything but anything obscure, if you will, because you'll have a lot of users going, oh, the site's already upgraded, why don't I see this, why don't I see that? And then basically what happens is a new web app is created that's the original name, and as you upgrade the sites, they basically move and get restored to their original name. And otherwise, users come in, hit the new site, if it hasn't been upgraded, it redirects them to whatever your temporary one is. So we did this and gradually upgraded, and for us it actually took quite a bit of time, but we were working through a lot of bugs. We got it done in about 2.5 months, if you will, but I think the good bulk of it we actually got done probably in the equivalent of about a week and a half of just running gradual at night. In other areas we did what's called a DB attach. Now, the product group, from a marketing perspective, may have slightly called it differently. I don't recall what we have in the literature at the moment, but we basically call it DB attach, because the idea is you have a V3 or 2007 environment. You create a web app and you just attach databases that are for the previous product, and it will upgrade those databases. And what we found when doing DB attach is we had 2 choices. One, the product group hadn't been thinking of, but we were operationally minded trying to get it done as quickly as possible, is you could spin up several farms, attach your databases, get them all upgraded, and then move them to their final destination. So basically run it in parallel. Or you could just run it serially and just keep attaching each database, and as it's upgraded, you're done. Well, we've done both, and both worked very well for us. When we did our personal sites, which were about a terabyte in size, and trying to do it in a day or a couple days, the parallel worked very well. So for any customers that are really large, trying to do this really quickly, that's the kind of thing to sort of think about is, okay, what speed or what amount of time do I have to do this? Can I afford an outage during this period of time? With others, we didn't have as much hardware in place. In some of our regions, we don't have the same excess hardware. We would basically do this DB attach and just attach one at a time and get through 5 or 6 databases over a weekend. When you do that, you keep the URL in place, but you're upgrading everything at the same time. So if there's one site you need to exclude, you can't do that when you're doing the DB attach. So a lot of the organization sort of gets into like which method better applies to my situation. One of the things we found that was really difficult in upgrade in general is communications. Telling users we're going to be upgrading them and making sure that we're getting the right audience to say, hey, your site's not going to be available next weekend. If you need something from it, go get it now.
Right.
SharePoint doesn't have anything I can just publish like a banner on all the pages and say, the maintenance coming up, you can't use it. With V3, with the new version, we think we can build something to do that kind of stuff for next time, but with the current one, we couldn't do anything. So communication was very, very important, letting people know the sites would be down. And then we had to coordinate across all of our teams, because when we're doing these upgrades or changing these things, we need to make sure we're crawling them correctly, that we know where the start addresses are. Mm-hmm. We need to make sure that if we want to upgrade the My Sites, that there's profiles already upgraded to V3. So sort of coordination of these components and sort of being aware of what that impact is going to happen, which ones we want to do first.
Okay.
So as I said, our methods are a little different, our order is a little different because we're driving this as a dog food. So there's things we wanted to make sure we got done early for testing purposes versus others. But we did find with portals that there's a lot more hand-holding involved, so we'd spend a little more time with the customers prepping them because there was more likely a chance of something not looking quite right after the upgrade. For team sites, personal sites, we didn't need to do that.
Okay.
So it kind of varied in that aspect. And even when we got to the shared services, which you may choose to upgrade, we've tried both, basically the DB attach and the gradual. And either will work, but it depends on sort of the situation. If you're going to upgrade on the same hardware, everything, you're going to want to gradually upgrade the shared service provider.
Right.
If you're going to move to new hardware, in our case we were lucky we were doing a hardware refresh roughly at the same time, that we had new hardware there to basically just move stuff over and share the storage, then you can do that as well and basically detach the shared service providers, attach them over there, but you may or may not take the index with you. You won't be able to take your search scopes with you. Those are in the registries on the previous machines. Some stuff won't come over, so you need to sort of plan for that and do some testing.
Okay.
And we spent a lot of time testing.
All right. You'd mentioned performance improvements when you went to 64-bit SQL Server. Mm-hmm. Are you running 64-bit SharePoint as well?
We are in a mixture at the moment. So one of the things that's important for the dog food is making sure that we can sign off on the product in certain states. Mm-hmm. So we were finding, especially towards the last, what would you say, 2-3 months, yeah, we had a lot of app pool problems with memory. And what was essentially happening is SharePoint has a larger footprint in the app pool this time around than last time. There's just more stuff, yeah, if you will. Mm-hmm. And it's running ASP.NET 2.0, which is a bit bigger than the previous version. Well, when we were running this, we were finding that as users were using it, we were seeing a lot of memory fragmentation, and the app pools would just start, we'd crash or we'd slow down. The combination of memory leaks at that point, because not everything had been plugged, we were just having little slowdowns trying to figure this out. So we stayed on the 32-bit front-end architecture throughout the dog food, because we wanted to make sure, yes, we could run our business, we could explain it, we could find every possible way to tune this to keep it up and running. But we also recognize that right now people aren't using all of the features of SharePoint, and our environment has just reached a point where we need to move to 64-bit. So we've been running 64-bit Excel servers since day one. Mm-hmm. The indexes and the query servers, we switched all of them when we did our upgrade to RTM, and then we're in the process right now of swapping the web front ends out. So we don't want to carry a lot of excess hardware, so it's not like we have a replacement for everything. It takes some time to basically flatten and rebuild, so we're doing it farm by farm as we go forward with this. So we'll introduce 64-bit front ends. The only way to take advantage and get more really addressable memory and still meet some of our goals of consolidation of fewer servers in our environment is we're also adding RAM. So we're going from 4 gig front ends to 8 gig front ends, partially because the OS 64-bit is going to take up more memory. Mm-hmm. I mean, your variables are double the size type of thing, objects in general. But also, once you get to the 64-bit OS, your process space is significantly higher. You're not capped at 2 gigs, which is what we were with 32-bit, right, and why we had all those problems with memory fragmentation.
Okay. So, Mark, tell us a little bit about, if I'm getting ready to go out to put search in place, what are some of the landmines or what are some of the things to be aware of?
Yeah, for us, like I said, we came out early in beta 1, and so the landmine was, just starting with that. It was it actually we did a lot of planning, and it actually went reasonably well. We found a lot of bugs with the product that we helped the product group fix, which was a great thing. We ran that for probably, I'm thinking, 6 or 7 months before we moved to the beta 2. And what we had hoped was that the beta 2 would offer us some, it would make it a little bit easier. And it did in certain areas, but we found new things in other areas. And so for us, beta 2 was kind of a push. We got some fixes that we needed to get, but there were some issues that we didn't get. And beta 2 TR was about the same thing. RTM was a huge upgrade for us, and it worked really well in that area. The thing about search is that you're going to push the envelope on everything that you do there. We're talking 23 million documents. We're talking trying to come around as fast as we can to do upgrades, or keeping the index refreshed and up to date. You've got people publishing and they want it in the index by tomorrow. And our goal is to try and crawl at least Redmond incrementally once a day. Right now we're running into some issues crawling EMEA and Asia, just because legacy, there's some legacy code over there, and plus they're doing some migrations over there, and so it's taking us a little bit longer to get there.
We haven't upgraded most of it either.
Yeah, and we are getting there.
Okay.
But we're pushing the envelope on everything. This is a huge issue. Some of the things that we'd like to see that we're going to be working with the product group for the next version is that we'd like some more manageability, some administration efforts. When you ask me the question of how many servers out there, I don't really have a good way to go out and tell you that, and that's a problem that we see, is that we don't know how many servers that we have. We can go in and we could programmatically write and get some information back from it, but natively from the product, we just can't get that today easily. I mean, it's there. We just need to go get it. So,
All right. One of the things that's been pretty cool with this last release of SharePoint is the ease that I can provision my own site and put my own site in place. Is that something that what extra planning or things did you guys have to think about before turning that loose? Is there anything unexpected that came up from that?
Well, I mean, basically, we deal with a very interesting culture at Microsoft, which is not the same as all the customers we talk to.
Right.
Certainly something that comes up in conversation a lot. We're a very decentralized organization, so most groups work on their own and sort of focus forward. It's not a central mandate from the top. We actually tried that with the last release and failed miserably in terms of organizing hierarchy for search and what websites should be where and how content should be. It just doesn't work here. At least it has in the past. Maybe in the future, but not right now. So what we found is we're looking at SharePoint primarily from a cost savings perspective, as well as ensuring there's a level of service at the lowest possible cost within the company. So most teams that would spin up SharePoint sites get very expensive. We've made the product really easy from a WSS perspective, just roll it out. It's almost a one-click install. However, that doesn't come with any of the operational practices for backup, restore, redundancy, monitoring. It's not there. Most teams that are going to put something into the box are going to get into trouble. Password expires, someone's on holidays. So what we did is we enabled self-site creation from the very beginning within our environment. And then we went out of our way with version 1, STS, to basically put, I think we had a total of about 30 machines worldwide in different regions. We sort of expanded that a little bit. Worked fine, it was local, great experience, very difficult to manage, essentially, for an operations team. It's just too many servers in too many places. So with the second release, we basically put these 3 data centers together, deployed one single host name, and encourage people to come over to it. So the last version was Team EMEA, Team Asia, and Team. Worked very well, all WSS based, people provisioned. We grew very large, really didn't have any problems there. We just sort of managed life cycle when sites get abandoned. Every so often we sort of go through, see if the sites haven't been used in a while, contact the users, delete the sites that aren't used.
Right. That's all pretty automated, isn't it?
There is some stuff in the product that's automated, but the way that we approach it, we do a bit of it manually.
Okay.
The thing is, if you try to use it from a portal perspective, people tend to read content, not change content, so the last modified date isn't a very good model.
Right.
When it's in the team area, it is more collaboration, so the modified date becomes important. The way the model is out of the box basically is it just, regardless of usage, it asks you whether the site's still in use. We try to track usage first and then only hit that subset of our audience. So with the self-site creation, we got that in place. WSS was great. We want people to use all the new features that are part of MOS. So what we did is, because we were doing gradual upgrade, one of the things I didn't mention earlier is you can't allow self-site creation to be running at the same time you're doing the gradual upgrade. Since gradual upgrade was going to run 3 months, we couldn't exactly shut down people's ability to create sites.
Right.
So we created HTTP SharePoint, HTTP SharePoint EMEA, HTTP SharePoint Asia in each of the regions so people could create their sites there. It was great in a couple of ways. One, there's really no differentiation between a portal or team site anymore, so if you want the portal features, the publishing and all that, just create a site with that template or enable those features. If you already have a site that's there and you want to upscale it on features, just go and enable those features. So it was really great in the fact that just go to HTTP SharePoint, create a site, and change it as you need it. It'll evolve with you. And that's one of the big changes we're moving from, because in the previous version, we couldn't self-provision portals. We couldn't self-provision host header sites or sites that are using WSS in corporate hosting mode. We chose not to self-provision extranet sites in the design that we put in place. All of these things we're sort of revisiting and changing and saying, you want portal features, go create a portal under SharePoint. You know, if you want some kind of quick URL sort of redirect, we'll deal with that. You can come to hit ops. Okay. And that works great in the fact that operationally it's not costing us money. Right now, for us, we're looking somewhere around $55, $60 a ticket anytime someone's calling help desk to get a site provisioned or do some basic stuff. If it needs to get escalated, it gets that much more expensive. Well, by letting people create their own sites and immediately do collaboration, we're saving the company money. And then the fact that we have it centralized as a team, overall, the fact that all the operations worldwide are being managed by one team, we can keep it consistent. We also keep the cost significantly down. We have found, in some cases, when we've moved some customers over that did choose to self-host, we've saved the company millions of dollars. You know, it's incredible how much it can cost if you're inefficiently just running a couple sites and a lot of hardware, you know, but when you have sort of consolidated and a really dedicated team, it really does save us money.
The downside to that, which it is great for self-creation and all that, the downside to that is kind of the life cycle management of the document process. We've got sites that could be quite old. Mm-hmm. They may be used, they may be not. I mean, a lot of times, you know, people have said, well, if we're not using them, we should remove them. And you know, I come back with the example of, you know, if it's a disaster recovery site and you never have a disaster, you really don't ever need to go there. But the minute you do, those are issues that you need to see.
Sure. So
some documents that we've got out there are quite old, and you know, we've got maybe yearly things that we have going on all the time, and they never get updated. As in, those never get deleted or archived or put off into place. And so one of the things that we'd like to see is more of a capability of taking older information that may still have use, but archiving that off someplace else, and maybe flagging that when you do a search and bring that back, saying, yeah, we're going to bring that back to you, but this is old information, and you may not want to see it, or you may not need to see it.
Cool. Okay. All right. Anything else, guys?
I guess I have one last thing sort of to add. One of the things that's really, in general with SharePoint, one of the things that's really nice about this version is the last couple of versions, it's always felt like the team product and the portal product are two separate products.
Yeah.
You know, they look the same and sort of get marketed the same, but once you really are operating them, they operate very much as two separate products. You have a different number of databases, or you manage it differently, admin's different. That's just not the case here. And for us, having managed this now for over a year and sort of bring things in, the really nice thing is whether we go to the team sites or whether we go to the portal sites, the UI is the same, the database structure is the same, all the operations we run to for disaster recovery are essentially the same. It really helps in the consistency. And for teams that are struggling that may have both or may have deployed one and look apprehensive at the other, it really is a step forward in that respect that everything's essentially a website and you're just buying basically more features, more functionality if you choose to use it. And that's probably the biggest change for us in this version, and the stuff we want to build on with the product group as we go forward, is we find, oh, this is still a little bit different. This isn't quite the same.
Gotcha. Okay.
So
good. All right. All right. Well, thanks for your time, guys.
Thank you.